Hey guys, so this video is going to be my Shadowlands Affliction Warlock PvP guide, but primarily it's going to be a guide for how to build your Affliction Warlock in PvP. I'd like to talk about how to play it and go over that, but if I did, I'd want it to be more in depth and explain everything thoroughly. And I feel like if I did that, this video would end up being 2 hours long, and I don't think anyone wants to watch a 2-hour video in one sitting. So this video is going to be specifically on how to build your lock, and I will make a series later on in the coming weeks on how to play, so like positioning, hiding, CC, how to do damage effectively. That'll come in the future. However, I will throw in a game of threes at the end of the video so you guys can get an idea of how to play one by watching me. So without further ado, let's take a look at what Affliction is like in Shadowlands. So what changed for Affliction in Shadowlands going from BFA? First thing, curses got reintroduced. Exhaustion is back, tongues and weakness. Exhaustion is actually pretty useless because our legendary basically puts this up for us for free when we press corruption, sacrilege. Weakness is also pretty useless because it no longer reduces the enemy's attack power but increases the time between their melee attack swings. It's pretty low priority global, but you can use this to eat a warrior spell reflect now, because this really has no negative effect on you if it is reflected. And lastly, Curse of Tongues is back. Unfortunately, it is nerfed to 15% in PvP and lasts for 15 seconds only, so it's not as good as it used to be, but Curse of Tongues is still great, especially against teams without a decurse. You can really slow down the enemy team. We also got Baseline Port back, which is much needed and allows us to take Coil or Howl of Terror back in the talent tree. It used to be on this slot, I think, which is pretty nice. Increases our mobility a lot. And in terms of dealing damage, UA no longer stacks anymore, and UA Dispel actually does damage once again. UA Dispel does about 30% of someone's HP when it's dispelled, and it can actually crit as well for about 175% of that. So UA is once again really good dispel protection. It does a lot of damage, and most healers will really just tend not to dispel it. Second, Malefic Rapture is the soul shard spender that we now use instead of spending our shards on UA. What Malefic Rapture does is it does damage based on how many dot effects you have on the target, and this also works with each class ability we get from the Covenants. So for example, with Warlocks get a dot, and that will actually boost Malefic Rapture's damage, which is pretty cool. Lastly, we got a new PvP talent, which actually is our second soul shard spender, and basically what it does is it makes your dots tick 30% more often, so essentially a 30% DPS boost when you press it for 15 seconds. It's on a 30-second cooldown. Alright, so for an overview or playstyle of an Affliction Warlock in Arena, your main strategy or goal is dealing a ton of spread damage and rotting the enemy team while kiting. Winning games this way through attrition by not allowing the enemy team to ever connect to you or really touch you. Doing this, you'll rot the enemy team's HP down as well as their mana, and it's basically the best way to play Affliction Warlock right now. You really aren't focusing on CCing or like setting up kills any other way. That's its strength. Its weaknesses involve being probably the squishiest caster in the game. Having to cast to do a majority of your damage, basically all your damage to be honest. It doesn't have good setup CC. You really only have Howl or Fear to CC people with, and you also run into this problem where you're actually global staffed a lot of the game. So for Affliction Warlock, it depends on what faction you're going to play. If you're Alliance, you definitely want to be human. The reason for that is this ratio right here, removes all stun effects on a 3-minute cooldown. By being human, it allows you to play either 2 DPS trinkets or play with Relentless and another DPS trinket or Battle Masters. Obviously, it depends on the matchup on what you want to actually play. But being able to take 2 DPS trinkets, for example, into certain comps or play Relentless into like Rogue Mage is actually super useful, since you normally will be trinketing a stun anyway. And if you do get shept or blinded, it's only going to last 6 seconds instead of the full 8. So Human is by far the best race for Alliance. You also get the bonus of getting secondary stats. You get bonus secondary stats. It's not much, it's 2% amp across all of them, but it's a nice side bonus, and most importantly, you also get 10% extra reputation gain, which means you won't need to farm them more as hard.
Literally the worst kind of content you could ever come up with. Like, fuck me, man. Dude, and it just spawns on me. Like, are you fucking shitting me, dude? Now I'm just stuck in this middle of like this fucking piss river and I can't see.
If you don't want to play human for whatever reason, I think you can also go Void Elf. Void Elf actually has a passive racial which makes it so you don't get pushed back while casting, which is actually really, really good. Because I did mention earlier that you cast a lot as an Affliction Warlock, so having that pushback get removed passively is really awesome. Actually saves you a lot of time. But the main reason why you would ever pick Void Elf is for its teleport ratio. It's on a 3-minute cooldown, but when you combine that with the baseline port we have now, Gateway, Soul Shape from Nightfare Covenant, which is our best covenant, you get a crap ton of mobility. So I'm actually considering going Void Elf myself after I hit Exalted with the Maw. If you're playing Horde, then the only choice that you have is to go Orc. Orc has a 20% stun reduction Relentless, which allows you to play Medallion, and it's just simply, it's way too good. It's way better than any of the other races. I don't think you should ever go Troll or Undead, even though Will of the Forsaken and Berserking is pretty good. It's just, the Orc ratio is just way too good for Arena. Nearly every class has a stun, and by reducing the duration of that, it's just so valuable. Moving on to talents. For PvP, this is the cookie cutter spec that generally you can run in almost all situations. I'm going to talk about each talent row specifically, but this is what I play in, I would say, 99% of my games. The only two things that you should ever change under any circumstance in PvP is Howl for Mortar Coil. I honestly like to play Howl almost every game of threes, but Coil has its place sometimes, especially into warrior teams where Howl or Fear isn't as useful. And lastly, Creeping Death. Because Dark Soul is now purgeable, when you face a mage team, for example, if you press Dark Soul, you're just going to get it stolen and give it to the mage. Or really any purge team, Dark Soul loses a ton of value. So with that in mind, you might want to consider playing Creeping Death into purge teams. So Shamans, Priests, Mages especially, you want to play Creeping Death. I do play Dark Soul into them sometimes if I think I can get away with it. For example, against a mage, if you spell lock them on Polymorph, they can't steal your buffs for 6 seconds. And so if you're able to get out of line of sight while you let your dots tick with Dark Soul up, it's pretty effective. However, I'm going to talk about each talent and why I picked them. So in the first row, ID is the only choice possible. I mentioned earlier that Affliction Warlocks run into a ton of global issues, and this is simply just the least global intensive out of the three, and also synergizes pretty well with Soul Rot, which is our Night Fae class ability. Nightfall is a completely dead talent. Shadowbolt literally hits for 300 damage, and I mean, it makes Shadowbolt hit 50% harder, but let's be honest, you're not wasting global on 450 damage. This is totally useless, even though it applies Shadowy Embrace. Drain Soul is also just not good because you don't have the globals to really press it. I know it puts up Shadowy Embrace and it's okay for single target, but anytime you really have to cast, you're really just going to be casting Malefic Rapture anyway. So really just avoid this at all costs. Drain Life at 50 stacks does do a decent amount of damage, and again, it synergizes with Soul Rot pretty nicely. For the second row, a lot of people ask me this question whether to play Writhe in Agony or Absolute Corruption. Never pick Siphon Life in PvP before we get there. Siphon Life is absolutely garbage damage, and also gives you even more global issues than you already have. Never pick this under any circumstance. You don't even need a bind for it. I don't even think I have one. So the argument between Writhe and Absolute Corruption, Writhe in Agony will make your Agony deal more damage than Absolute Corruption will make your Corruption deal Corruption, if I explain that, if that makes sense. So if you're looking at it like that, yes, Writhe in Agony will do more DPS, but the thing you have to keep in mind about Absolute Corruption is it increases the duration of Corruption from 14 to 24 seconds. 10 seconds longer on the debuff duration. When you realize that, when you're playing like 3v3 arena and trying to keep up dots on 3 targets, if you play Writhe, you are not going to do anything all game but reapply and maintain your dots the whole time. If you play Absolute Corruption, you actually do get time to cast Malefic Rapture, Fear, and like just do other things in the game and keep dot uptime like high. This is why I take it. If I'm playing Absolute Corruption, I actually have time to do Rapture, which is what actually does real damage and scares the enemy team. If I'm going to play Writhe, yeah, I'm going to do slightly more passive damage, but let's be honest, I'm never casting Rapture, it's gonna suck, and I'm just gonna get capped at 5 shards like the whole game. On the third option, this is a no-brainer. Burning Rush is completely a PvE talent. Don't take this, please. Dark Pact, people have been suggesting this in 2s. I can see this having a use in 2s against double DPS if you're playing Lock Healer. And that is literally the only use for it. In almost all situations, you'll always take Demon Skin because it just makes you passively tankier and helps to sustain. Warlocks are incredibly squishy. So yes, you might live 1 DR or 1 go with Dark Pact, but after that, you are going to be even squishier, and you're already the squishiest caster. So you really want to avoid making yourself squishier than, you know, normal. I avoid Dark Pact literally like the plague, and I never take it. Demon Skin the whole time. Fourth row, Phantom Singularity is the only real choice here. You don't press Seeds of Corruption in PvP, and Vital Taint costs Soul Shard as well as being a cast. Mentioned this earlier, global issues have to cast a lot, don't want to add to that. Plus Phantom Singularity actually does a pretty good amount of damage. The healing portion of it really isn't important and not something that you really care about. So on this row, I explained that I usually play Howl of Terror. I think this is really matchup based, and especially like against warriors, I think Mortal Coil is probably just better. But I'm not 100% sure on which one is really, you know, better in in most situations, but I like playing Howl because what it does is it actually does give us an option to CC the enemy healer, and it's also off global, which is really nice. Even if I'm facing like a warrior cleave in 3s, I do still kind of like Howl because it does let me to cast a UA before they're able to break out sometimes, and you can also get 2 Howls in before the Berserker Rage is up, and at least get 1 Howl of Terror to sit on a warrior, for example. Mortal Coil, it's a short 20-yard range, and the way you play Affliction Lock is honestly you stand 40 yards away, so I just don't see much value in it, to be honest. It's, I would say this is more matchup based, and you really need to think about it before you decide, but Howl of Terror is my default go-to pick. Anyway, moving on to this tier. This is the only option. Reason being, your pets are super squishy now. The game is super fast-paced. You only have Feldom on a 3-minute CD to resummon your pet if it dies. If you have no pet as a Warlock, it's actually a miserable time not being able to spell lock anything, and you'll get eaten alive. So you take Grimoire Sacrifice so that you can actually sacrifice your pet and not deal with that headache. And on the plus side, it actually hits really hard. Like I would say in the majority of my arena games, at least 10 to 12% of my damage comes purely from Grimoire Sacrifice. As a side bonus, Grimoire Sacrifice, when it procs, actually will eat a warrior spell reflect. And you can get pretty lucky with that. If a warrior tries to like reflect your UA, it might proc from a dot tick right as your UA is about to finish and eat it for you, and your UA applies to the warrior. They might fix that in the future, but for now, this is the best choice by far, even without that bug. So yeah, we definitely take this. In the last row, I talked about this earlier. Dark Soul is the default choice. Against Purge teams, you play Creeping Death because this is now purgeable. Yeah, not a good time if you're playing against Mage and you like Spell Steal, Kleptos your Dark Soul, and has 30% extra haste because you can't really get it off since you sack your pet. Moving on to PvP talents, this is also my default loadout for Affliction Lock. These two right here are 100% mandatory. You cannot play without them. Unfortunately, the way Affliction is designed in PvE kind of forces us to take these PvP talents. Rampant Afflictions allows you to put UA on 3 targets instead of just 1. In PvE, it's limited to 1. You really need to triple dot in PvP, so this is mandatory. Rapid Contagion is also a huge DPS boost and allows you to do more damage on the move. We talked about how Affliction Lock has to cast a bunch, so this actually alleviates that a little bit. Allows you to spend your shards without sitting there and casting 3 Raptures, so you can do a lot of damage while kiting. For the third option, if you are facing any team with a melee on it, you have to take Demon Armor. It's not a choice. You really need the HP and you need the armor increase. If you queue into a melee without this, you are actually gonna... That's literally suicide. I would change this against double caster teams to Nether Ward because, well, this doesn't really have much value. You get 5% HP into casters, but the armor doesn't help you. So when you face double caster like Mage Lock or like Ellie Boomy, you play Reflect, Nether Ward. All the other choices we have here are basically, unfortunately, not really able to be taken because these two mandatory talents, and this one is just saved for DA or Netherward. Okay, so moving on to Covenants. I actually made a Covenant video about which one's the best and why, and I talk about Conduits and all that. I'm going to link that in the description if you want to watch it. I don't really want to talk about it in this video because I feel like it might be a bit of too much overlap, but I will quickly go over it. If you're watching this right now, at the start of the season, we only have about 9 renown, and Korean locks at about 22 renown, I think, which is 8 weeks from release, so we're still over a month away. In that case, you want to be Naya from Night Fae, and the tree you want to go down is just to the left to get the potency conduit, down the middle, and then all the way down the middle to pick up this. But you're not going to make it to here because by the time you hit 30 renown, you'll be over into Korean. The reason why you pick Night Fae actually is mainly for this ability right here, Soul Shape. What it does is it teleports you forwards, lasts 12 seconds, and every 4 seconds you can teleport again. You couple that with Port and Gateway, it gives us, we're actually the most mobile Affliction lock has ever been. Basically, your main goal is to dot everyone and then just kite the melee that are trying to kill you, and have your dots ticking while you're kiting around in circles. As a side bonus, in towns and cities, it lasts forever, so you actually can have some mobility for once in a major city, especially if you can't mount up. And secondly, Soul Rot is our class ability for Warlocks, for Night Fae. What it does is it puts up a dot on a target and also spreads to nearby targets. And if you cast Drain Life on any target with Soul Rot on it, it will also Drain Life all the other Soul Rotted targets. So like I said earlier, it synergizes really well with Inevitable Demise. And you can, if you have a full stacked Inevitable Demise and you Soul Rot 2 melee, for example, you can do a ton of damage. Also, it's the hardest hitting class ability out of all the 4 Covenants, I believe, for Warlocks. So that's actually, that's a side bonus. But the main reason why you take Night Fae is because of Soul Shape for the mobility. It's really, really cool to use, and you can also use that to dodge abilities like Psychic Scream from a Priest or Leg Sweep from a Monk, so you can make some plays with this ability too. Definitely one of the funner Covenant abilities. The other ones are kind of boring, to be honest, so yeah. So we talked about Soulbinds. You want to go Naya for now until you hit 22 renown, I believe, and you unlock Korean. And yeah, if you want to hear more about that, definitely check out my Covenant video, and I go into more detail there. In terms of our Conduits, the best one you want to take for Endurance is in Accrued Vitality. The other two are really quite awful. Resolute Barrier at first glance seems okay, but by the time you've actually pressed Unending Resolve in an arena match, there's 0 chance you're making it to another one. Plus, it really doesn't reduce the cooldown of it that much. So, whereas Accrued Vitality and you couple that with Soul Rot and Inevitable Demise can actually put a pretty decent hot on yourself and save yourself. So this is the best Endurance one. For Finesse, the top 3 are good. Kilrog's Cunning is totally useless. Shade of Terror increases Fear Threshold before it breaks. I actually use this one nearly every game because it works on Howl of Terror. So even if you dot up someone full and you howl them, it won't break, at least for a few seconds, or depending on modifiers, but it actually gives us some kind of CC. Without this, your Howl of Terror literally breaks instantly. And this is the reason why I actually talent into Howl. Fel Celerity reduces Feldom by a certain amount of seconds. Why this is useful is because against casters, you can actually double CS. If you start off with your pet sacked, one sec. If you have your pet sacked, your Fel Hunter, and you CS someone, you can actually Feldom and it will reset. So by using Fel Celerity, you can reduce the cooldown on Feldom and double CS more often. This is good against Wizard Cleaves. I don't know if I would ever take it over Shade of Terror, for example, but this is something that we can maybe use in the future. Keep in mind, if you want to reset your CS, you have to do it in that order. Your pet has to be sacked first, and then you have to Feldom a new one out after CSing, and it will reset only that way. The third one, Demonic Momentum. Demonic Circle Teleport increases movement speed by 36% for 5 seconds. This is really helpful for kiting against melee cleaves, But at the same time, I still think Shade of Terror is better with Howl because you can peel for yourself, and you already have a ton of mobility between Port, Gate, and Soul Shape. So I feel like this one is a little bit overkill on the mobility department, but if you are having trouble living against melee cleaves, I would recommend running this one over the Shade of Terror. So the way I'd rank it would be Shade of Terror number 1, Demonic Momentum number 2, and then Fell Celerity number 3. They all have their uses. But for a cookie cutter build, just suck it in Shade of Terror. Lastly, for potency, you will have 2 slots in our best Soulbind for potency, and the 2 ones you want to take are Focus Malignancy, which increases Malefic Rapture damage when they have UA on them. So that just basically makes our hardest hitting cast just do a ton more damage, which is always a plus. Very simple. And then secondly, Rolling Agony, increasing duration of Agony. I mentioned earlier how we have a lot of global issues. Rolling Agony increases the duration, means we have to maintain less, use less globals, win-win all round. The other options for potency are honestly pretty terrible, and for example, Cold Embrace, you really just never use, you never even apply Shadowy Embrace in PvP. So the only 2 options that are viable, Rolling Agony and Focus Malignancy. I know I've socketed Focus Malignancy in here, but I would honestly prioritize Rolling Agony over it. Being able to play the game more and not maintaining your dots the whole time is just so important. It makes the gameplay feel a ton more fluid, and if you aren't playing this, you're even more global locked, and it's not as fun. Alright, moving on to our legendary. There is only one option for legendaries for Warlock, and that one is Sacrilash, which increases corruption damage and puts on a 50% slow. This legendary is amazing. Melee is our biggest counter. Melee literally eats Affliction Lock alive if they touch you, and so this helps you to kite because you don't need to apply Curse of Exhaustion anymore. It slows the same amount. It doesn't stack, by the way, with Curse of Exhaustion. It slows the same amount as Curse of Exhaustion, but it means that you don't need to waste as many globals maintaining that. So, and it can only be dispelled if they dispel corruption, and you can cover that with UA dispel. This legendary is by far the best. Please do not play any other one. None of the other ones are even close to as good. I made it on pants, and you can also make it on feet, and I'll explain why in a second. So basically, there are no haste versus feet in the game, and some people have made the legendary on their feet. However, the thing that you need to keep in mind is that with pants, they actually have a higher item stat budget than boots. This is true for pants, chest, and helmet. These are the highest stat budget pieces in the game. You get more stat. If you compare, for example, like a 200 item level pants, 200 item level boots, you'll notice that there's a ton more int, a ton more stamina, a ton more secondary stats on those. And so because a legendary can actually upgrade to 235 compared to the normal gear item level of 226, I went for the pants, even though I would sacrifice haste on my boots. I think someone did the calculation for me, and it would end up being 1 int and 5 stamina more if you made it on pants over boots, so the difference is really negligible. Honestly, I would recommend just, it comes down to personal preference. If you want a little bit more main stats and mastery over haste, or if you want a little bit more haste over main stat, stamina, and mastery, it really doesn't matter what you craft it on, but this is a reason why I crafted it on pants. But yeah, Sacrilash is our legendary. It's the best one you can get. I expect it to stay this way. I don't really think it will be nerfed, because I don't think Affliction Lock is in the greatest state. So it would be pretty silly if they nerfed something that makes us, somewhat viable. Where does it drop? It drops from Torghast, from Scolder's Hole, which is open actually this week. If you don't, you need to clear it on layer 3. If you don't get it this week, because you're watching this video a little bit later, you are going to have to wait until it rotates around. Torghast has 2 wings open every week, and there's a total of 6 wings. Scolder's Hole is the one it drops from. Also, as a side bonus, if you craft it on pants, the Conquest pants are actually more expensive than the Conquest boots. So you do save a little bit of Conquest there, but that efficiency is not something that would concern anyone, I think. But, side bonus. In terms of gear and stats, your priority for stats should always be Verse number 1 and Haste number 2. Secondary stats do start to have diminishing returns above 30%, but in Season 1 of Shadowlands, I really don't think we will hit 30% of either stat. So I'll explain why Verse is the best. When you wear 2 PvP trinkets, you get this 2-set bonus that increases the damage and healing benefit of your versatility by 40% when you're in Arena. That's basically, you can read it as a 40% Verse amp minus the damage reduction portion. If you remember Verse amps from BFA Corruption, this puts versatility at the #1 stat for every single PvP class, and it's no different for Warlock. But versatility also reduces your damage taken, so it's basically a mandatory #1 stat. Haste is the second best because what it does for your dots is it makes it tick more often, it reduces your global cooldown timer, and also makes your casts slightly faster. I mentioned earlier how much issues we had with globals, and so anything that helps with that is really what you want to take. So haste helps with that a lot. For your DPS rotation, you want to get 3 dots up on 3 targets, so UA, Agony, and Corruption. And then when you want to do more damage, you want to throw Soul Rot out, use Phantom Singularity, and then Dark Soul, Dark Glare, Rapid Contagion with Badge, and then spam Raptures. It's really important that you actually use Dark Soul and Dark Glare together, especially early on, because the haste will actually buff the Dark Glare, and you will actually do unhealable damage with that combo out. You also want to make sure you Soul Rot and Phantom Singularity before you Dark Glare every time. The reason for that is because Phantom Singularity and Soul Rot actually are pretty hard hitting dots, and Dark Glare will extend that by 8 seconds or something. So not only will your hard hitting dots stay up longer, you'll also get a longer window to cast Malefic Rapture and milk that value. Like I said earlier, what Malefic Rapture does is it does damage based on how many dots you have up at one time to everyone in your line of sight. So if you have 5 dots up, it's gonna do a ton more damage. So keep that in mind. One more thing to note is with the PvP talent, a lot of people have been asking me how to use this. You want to make sure you have ample amount of dots out. This talent doesn't snapshot. So what it means is you can have 4 dots out and then press it, and it will make them tick faster as soon as you press it. You don't need to press this before putting your dots up. Use your judgment when pressing this. For example, if you're playing 3s and you have 1 Agony out and 1 Corruption out, don't press this button, please, even if you're at 5 shards. Just save your shards until you at least get a UA or 2 out and a couple more dots. If you're pressing this before you put up your dots, you're really wasting a ton of time and just not optimizing it and using it efficiently. You're wasting a lot of valuable seconds of the buff, so try to avoid that at all costs. To be honest, I would actually recommend learning how to PvE as Affliction if you want to learn how to do a lot of damage, even if the talent build is a little bit different. This isn't necessary, but if you're new to the spec, it will teach you how to optimize and maintain your dots for Malefic Rapture, and it builds muscle memory, which is really going to translate over into PvP. I'll go a little bit more into detail on this in another video, though I don't want to spend too much time on it. Last topic I want to talk about is comps. So we'll start off with 2s. First things first, as an Affliction Lock, do not play double DPS as an Affliction Lock. It's not going to be a good time. You aren't like a mage where you have good CC and good burst. Your goal is to really just rot the whole team, and 2s isn't the best bracket for that kind of playstyle because you need time to do that, and when you're playing double DPS you don't have time. So play with a healer at always. Yeah, double DPS is horrendous. So for 2s, in my opinion, the best 2 comps are Lock Resto Druid and Lock Discipline Priest. With a Resto Druids have so much CC. If they play Feral Affinity, they can even go for re-stealths and rake people, stun them. They have Deep Roots to root people while you cover it with UA, so they can't dispel and it won't break because of Deep Roots talent. Basically, the Resto Druid is your babysitter, which is actually really nice and helps you to kite. Actually makes it possible to really survive against these melee classes that are really countering Affliction Locks right now. Secondly, the reason Disc Priest is so good is because Disc Priest does so much damage, and also because of Power Infusion. Power Infusion plus Dark Soul together and Dark Glare is actually just completely unhealable damage, especially in 2s when the 20% dampening is already in. You can rot teams so hard with a Disc Priest, plus their damage. since I mentioned earlier, the playstyle of an Affliction Warlock is really to kite as much as possible. This priest can just spend like the whole time doing damage and healing you through atonement that way, and so you're really able to run over a lot of teams that way. I'm not sure which is the better of the two, probably the Resto Druid version, but yeah, play Resto Druid Lock or Disc Priest Lock. I also think Lock Resto Shaman and Lock Holy Pally has a place, but I think the other two are better than them. In terms of Mistweavers, I'm not actually sure if they're good right now, but they don't seem so great based on the games I've had so far against Mistweaver monks, and plus they don't really synergize with Lock, so I would try to avoid playing with a monk if possible. As for threes, in my opinion, Ellie Affliction Healer, Boomkin Affliction Healer, and Warrior Affliction Healer are pretty good comps. CC comps in general won't be as good anymore for Affliction just due to how the spec plays and how it's designed. You're sort of forced into triple dotting due to Malefic Rapture and get the rapid contagion value. You really don't have any single target or reliable like CC for setup, so comps like Mage Lock and Rogue Lock really aren't as good as they used to be, I think. I might be wrong about those comps because the season has just started, but I have played a couple games of them and they don't seem that great. I really would recommend going for like more damage comps like the Boomkin, Ellie, Warrior Affliction. However, the best comp for Affliction Lock so far, in my opinion, has been Shadowplay. That is Shadow Priest, Affliction Lock, and Healer. In terms of which healer is actually best, it's a bit too early to say, but Resto Shamans and Holy Paladins are extremely strong. I think Holy Paladins are actually so sleeper OP, and I think they would fit in best. So I'm going to showcase a game here of Shadowplay actually to show the strength of it. It's from the first day of the season when I played with Cubsy and Snuts. In this game, Cubsy was playing on his Resto Druid, but hopefully you can see from the video how to play an Affliction Lock.
Oh my god, it's this fucking...
Hopefully I was able to clear up some info with this guide and enjoy the game coming up. Remember to subscribe, and I will make video guides very soon on how to actually play Affliction Lock in Arena so that you guys can get a better idea for that.
I'll suck them here.
Fade. Get a fade fear, okay? Fade fear.
Okay.
Stun priest, stun priest, stun priest.
Nice.
I can probably restun.
Okay, you. I'll silence off this.
You can't PS, he's dead. Oh my god, it's fucking cooked,
Trigger PS,
man.
trigger PS, trigger PS.
I
I
want to
can
not.
see him. Sees the pally, sees the pally. I can see him again, I
Nice,
can see him
nice,
again. I'll purchase shield too.
Sure.
System.
I just barked you.
Any bubble.
Okay.
I
I
can grip
can
you, Adam,
still put,
whatever.
no, I'll call out.
Okay, you.
Come agree with me.
Yeah, no, you grip.
Grip you. Sorry.
Oh, how when he gets me? I
Care.
used everything, What the fuck, man?
Nice.
I'm dead through all.
Minus.
I feed the priest. I'm stuck here, by the way. I'm stuck here
Fine.
forever.
I'm gonna... My games, careful.
My games?
Like MD me.
MC. I'm just spamming MC.
Oh my god.
Spam MC.
Yeah.
I have PM.
Nice priest.
I can port. He has wings again. He has one. Fake one kick.
Yeah.
Assist him.
It's
I'll
almost
port the
in.
fist. I'll port the fist.
My games.
Okay.
It's on right.
I have soul ship again. We're fine.
Nice, good.
I just on this
I'm
guy
gonna
too.
drain this guy. Big drain
Sure.
actually.
Try to suck him, MC him
It's
back.
really good.
Get it?
It's really good. Go in, Snuts. I have soul ship.
Yeah,
and
I see. I'm a fade fear.
Nice,
You
it's
just want
fine.
you, kill priest.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. I
can
can't
stop.
cast him. Casting monk, okay?
Is that maybe?
You kill him.
Right in the second.
Yeah. Monk no karma for a bit. Rapture shields, purging
Rapture.
everything, purging.
Just chill.
No.
Purging.
Or
I have soul
something.
ship.
What do you have? We have
I have
stuff.
soul ship. I have Shrink it too. I think we're fine.
Okay, we have port as well.
Dark. Feed these guys.
Oh, he's gonna.
That's good.
I'm gonna port sweep. I can port.
Okay, I've grip up in
I
10.
put now.
Nice.
Okay, I need help for the next star.
Try to fade Hodge. Couldn't.
I bark now.
Watch me.
I'm rest on.
That's nice. Stun priest on the stun. Into my games. Stun priest.
Here's Karma.
My games priest.
Just healing.
Yeah, just destroying everything.
I'm just gonna kill. I'm gonna break the Karma.
Yeah, killing everything.
I'm barking.
I can port again in 5, okay?
Priest, they're in my line. I'm gonna gate it.
Is this shit? Oh my
Holy
god,
fuck, bro.
man, that was through wall, dude. I almost died. Holy fuck.